who we can't mess with is the NFC West.
Okay.
Arizona Cardinals. And we're going with pass rush here as their biggest need.
Yeah, another team that needs quite a lot, and they're in a tough situation because of the they don't have a coach, and also because Kyler Murray got hurt so late in the year, so who knows how long they're without a viable quarterback for. But
you still have Kyler
right.
Murray. Yeah.
And whatever about how long that's going to take to work out, like you don't have any pass rush right now, pretty much. Marcus Golden is fine. But J.J. Watt was their best pass rusher. Even he was an interior guy. They need somebody on the edge. They need like a legit edge rusher.
Yeah, that makes sense. Zach Allen did have a nice breakout season as he hits free agency.
Yeah,
the Barbarian's back.
The Barbarian.
Right? They still have the Barbarian, Dennis Gardeck. They made the second and third, 2 third-round draft picks last year, Cameron Thomas and Myjai Sanders. Mm-hmm. Didn't see a ton from either guy, though. But, Arizona's defense was similar. They were similar to the Bears, and they were just a bad defense last year that did get some – they did create some big plays, right? They had some turnovers. They had some defensive touchdowns. But, yeah, they definitely lacked as far as impact players go on that side of the ball, particularly at pass rush. And you're talking about a team that's invested a ton in – linebackers the last couple of years, right? A lot of teams do usually spend their first-round picks on defensive line if they're going to go to the defensive side of the ball, or maybe corner. We have Zaven Collins. We have the Isaiah Simmons who's
playing slot corner,
kind of slot corner, whatever. But they've invested in linebackers in recent years, so yeah, pass rush makes a lot of sense, I think, for
a lot like the Vikings. Like I think they could use players throughout that defense. You assume that they're not going to go and completely bump Zaven Collins or Isaiah Simmons out of the lineup, even though they've changed sort of power structures within that organization, and they're not necessarily as wedded to those guys as they were when they drafted them. Still, I think Isaiah Simmons in particular actually looks way better in this sort of slot hybrid role DB thing than he did as a linebacker. Like, that's what he was doing in college. And again, I think generally there's a much stronger connection when you take these guys that are doing a certain thing in college and kind of ask them to do the same thing in the NFL. Like, it stands to reason they would be better at doing that than they are doing something completely different. So Simmons might actually be on his way to a sort of career resurgence in this new role if that continues. Zaven Collins, I still think, flashes the ability to be an impact linebacker, but he probably needs the front line in front of him to be better and maybe the back end to be better as well.
So you went with pass rush for the Cardinals. We have to give an honorable mention to the offensive line, though. As far as returning starters, you have DJ Humphries at left tackle, coming off of injury. Rodney Hudson at center. He's coming off of he just hasn't been as good in recent years after being one of the elite centers in the NFL.
Very old at this point.
Yes, very old at this point. Justin Pugh, Will Hernandez was on a 1-year deal there. Kelvin Beachum, those guys are all hitting free agency. Max Garcia, all of their depth pieces hitting free agency. The one interesting guys you kept mentioning was Josh Jones, who finally got to play tackle, where he played tackle in Houston in college and was pretty good there. Has not been good at guard. So you've got basically this is what you have, 2 left tackles and a center who's almost 40. I mean, what is Hudson really?
He's not that old.
I'm just kidding. He's
guess 35.
He's 33. That's old for a center. He'll be 30. He'll be 34 by the time the season rolls around, which is basically 40 in center years.
Yeah, I mean, their problem with the left tackle thing is that Humphries he signed his deal relatively last year. So I think, they're not going to cut him because it costs too much money. Maybe they can trade him away and it's a bargaining chip. But Josh Jones, I think, showed that he could be their starting left tackle last year.
Jones could be actually a good, trading piece.
But I don't think you're getting as much because he's young and cheap, and he's going to be due a contract soon.
He is. If I was a team that needed a left tackle, I might call about Josh Jones just to try to steal him. You get him for a year, you might have to re-sign him and the whole thing. I might want to steal Josh Jones, though.
But if I'm Arizona, I'd be trying to move Humphries because he's on the big contract. And
it's harder to move, though.
But consequently, you get cheaper if you get rid of him.
I'll tell you a team that could use any offensive line help. That's the Los Angeles Rams. What are these segues here, Sam? The Rams' offensive line is their biggest need per Sam Monson over at PFF.com.
Per Sam Monson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Explain. Pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
They were bad.
Their season went so bad that it's kind of difficult to sort of turn back the clock and remember when things were just starting to go bad, right? But right at the start, remember week 1, opening weekend, right? Buffalo against Los Angeles, the defending Super Bowl champions against the team that everybody thought was the favorites for the Super Bowl. It was like as good as an opening as you could get. And the Los Angeles offensive line got its shit wrecked by Buffalo's pass rush. And you're like, oh, that's going to be a problem. Then Buffalo's pass rush sort of faded as the year wore on, and particularly when Von Miller went down. But the Rams' offensive line didn't get much better. It bounced back a little bit for the next couple of weeks, and then it just sort of fell to rack and ruin as the season went on. It was 4 bad players and Rob Havenstein. Like that can't fly the next season.
It is amazing that there's just been those couple years. I know the Rams had way more issues than just the offensive line this year because everyone else got hurt as well. But 2019, the line fell apart, including Havenstein, who's been just incredibly consistent outside of one season. And then this year, the line just completely fell apart. I mean, so Joseph Noteboom got hurt. Joe's coming back, trying to replace Andrew Whitworth. We still don't really know if he's good enough. He got wrecked against good competition, against lesser competition. He was okay. David Edwards will hit free agency. A couple other backups will hit free agency. So you have players who weren't great and players that are leaving, and they just need to invest in the line. So it feels like one of those years where maybe they dabble in free agency a little bit, draft some players, but I think they know. I mean, look, if they stay healthy offensively, they can figure it out with Cooper Kupp, obviously, as the lead guy, but Allen Robinson, you know, maybe get him in the mix a little bit better in year 2 here. But boy, if they go into the season with, you know, offensive line issues again, the whole season can get derailed. So they're going to attack it this offseason. That's their biggest need.
Yeah, I mean, they're an intriguing situation because of this whole approach to roster construction that they've had, the stars and scrubs thing that we talked about. It needs the stars all firing. So immediately you've got the question of, well, is Aaron Donald even going to be there again? If he isn't, that's arguably the best player in the entire NFL is no longer on the team. That's a pretty big problem. 2 of your stars that need to fire are Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp. In order to do that, they need an offensive line that's at least pretty decent. So for 2 of those stars to function, the scrubs need to assemble an offensive line that can be pretty good, which is not, you know, the easiest achievement in the world necessarily. So they're in this sort of weird spot where when you look last year, the year we just had, this current year, generally speaking, the stars still kind of fired. Like their best players on defense were still Aaron Donald, was still Jalen Ramsey, was Bobby Wagner who came over. It just didn't matter because everything else fell apart. So it's actually the kind of scrubs element of this that needs to get back on track. The stars kind of did what they were supposed to. Obviously, Matthew Stafford went down, and from that point on, the whole thing was obviously dead in the water. But they were, you know, taking on water way before that ever happened anyway.
You say scrubs as an endearing term, of course.
Well, just as a, you know, it's
as a descriptor,
a broad brush descriptor of the people that aren't Aaron Donald.
It's not the problem with the strategy, the risk associated with the strategy, right? We know what the reward is. The reward is you win the Super Bowl in 2021 with Matthew Stafford. To me, no matter what anybody says, the strategy worked, right? Their aggressive strategy of getting the Jalen Ramseys and Matthew Staffords of the world in lieu of first round, Von Millers in lieu of top picks, worked because they have a Super Bowl. Then the risk associated with it is you go into the draft. Last year they didn't have a pick until pick 104, and they were the ones laughing about whether they were laughing at the Patriots or not. Cole Strange going in the first because they're looking at guys like Cole Strange who have to come in and fill an immediate need at pick 104. And Logan Bruss was their pick at 104. It's like, this dude's got to come in and play guard for us because that's our hole, right? And he doesn't even play a snap because he gets hurt. And then it all goes downhill. It got even worse from there. They just didn't have the depth to compete. And this year's draft allotment is similar. We have them with potentially 4 comp picks, 10 total picks, only 2 picks in the top 100. So there's still plenty of opportunities to pick players, but the lower you get in the draft, the hit rates go down. So they got to, hit on some of those picks. And that was part of their other, of the stars and scrub strategy is they found starting corners and safeties and stuff in linebackers rounds 3 through 7. That was part of it, right? And they didn't necessarily do that last year. They didn't get that immediate impact. So, yeah, offensive line I think is going to get plenty of love by the Rams this offseason.
There's an update to the MVP Super Bowl curse. This one's from our guy Josh Dubow from the AP as well. MVPs since the merger to lose the Super Bowl pre-1999. So you go back further, the curse extends.
Rob only went back to 01.
Yeah. Brett Favre, 1997.
Lost
Thurman Thomas, 1991. Boomer Esiason,
to Washington,
1988. John Elway, 87. Niners. Dan Marino, Washington. 84. Joe Theismann, Niners. 83. Kenny Anderson, Raiders? 81. So the Bengals had the MVP both years they went.
49ers.
Larry Brown, 1972.
That's Dolphins.
Ends the list. Well, yeah, the Bengals had the MVP both years they went.
How about that?
In the 80s.
Kenny Anderson, was that 81? Wasn't Chris telling us he had some like ridiculous game where he had like one completion week 1 or something? Like he was so bad in week 1 and then went on to win the MVP. Like he was good after that. Somebody look that up for us. Somebody in the live chat. We're live.
Yeah, that isn't here.
That's great. Are we moving on? We had 2 more teams to discuss here.
Sure.
We forgot the Titans again this week, but yeah, that's fine.
Let's go to the NFC.
San Francisco 49ers. Biggest need for the Niners here, Sam.
They can go a few different places as well. I went interior defensive line simply because, you know, in this world of what did you last see? The last thing I saw was Javon Kinlaw being put on roller skates and tossed out of the club by the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line. So from that perspective, I'm like, they need to make sure that doesn't happen again. But you could easily argue for, you know, a couple of other positions in them as well.
We make a lot of statements here, like from a process standpoint, that was a good move, right? Remember the Niners move from a process standpoint. I raved about it. They traded.
You did. I didn't like it as much, though.
You didn't like it as much.
Because to me, this was it the same year that happened as the Diggs-Jefferson trade, or was it a year later, or earlier, rather?
Diggs-Jefferson was the same year, 2020.
Okay, so 2 teams essentially did the same thing, right? And on the one hand, you got like it worked out as well as it could possibly work out for both sides. And on the other hand, you saw the reason that it's risky. So both teams, the selling team essentially tried to get rid of a player to get cheaper and use the pick that they got for that player on his replacement. And essentially, if you get it right, you got cheaper and you saved everything. You did well. So the Vikings ship off Stephon Diggs, who was getting unhappy. They get a hell of a lot cheaper, and arguably they get better, bringing in Justin Jefferson with their first-round pick. That's brilliant. It's great for the Bills, who traded a first-round pick for the certainty of Stephon Diggs, and it's great for the Vikings because they used that pick, and they got a guy who's every bit as good as Diggs. The 49ers, well, they trade away DeForest Buckner. For the Colts, it's great. They pay a first-round pick for the certainty that DeForest Buckner will be really good. He has been really good for them. The 49ers use that first-round pick on a DeForest Buckner replacement, and he has been terrible so far. So Kinlaw just hasn't stepped into those shoes whatsoever. And like this is why the buying team is willing to give you a first-round pick for a guy that comes with a big contract because of the certainty that he's good and the corresponding risk of not finding the good guy if they were to use the first-round pick.
Yeah, so well described for what happened. And now I'm going to say, so Kinlaw has been horrible. And what you mentioned, so the big need is the interior of the defensive line. Kinlaw, I love watching player development and all that stuff. He's a big 6'5", 6'6" defensive tackle. Sometimes those guys struggle with pad level and playing the run. DeForest Buckner. It is fascinating, by the way, that Justin Jefferson and Diggs are kind of similarly styled players, right? And Jefferson replaces Diggs. The Niners went with a similarly styled player as DeForest Buckner, a big, long defensive tackle with not nearly the same skills as Buckner. Right? Javon Kinlaw has really struggled. And in that Eagles game, I did make it a point to watch Kinlaw on the live broadcast, and he was getting moved by my favorite description of a defensive tackle that gets moved like a library ladder. Library ladder, he's sliding up and down. I mean, he's just getting owned by the Eagles' offensive line, and it was an issue. Now, I would still go back and defend the move itself for the Niners. I still think is probably the right one because I don't know. They wouldn't have them. They were in a spot in their life cycle as a team, and particularly a defense, where they had to pay Eric Armstead, pay Fred Warner, eventually pay Nick Bosa, right? They got to pay Nick Bosa now. they couldn't afford to have DeForest Buckner on the books for $20 million a year. And they right now, despite Javon Kinlaw, still have a really good defense. Now, it came back to bite last week or whatever, and you'd rather be better on the interior of the defensive line. The player itself didn't work out, but the process I still think is sound. They had the money to go get Travarius Ward at corner. They'll have the money to go get, to re-sign Nick Bosa for the big deal that they need to. So I still think the process is right with the Niners, but it's much better if Kinlaw ended up being a good player. And I think, Kinlaw struggled. Whoever you want to position, Eric Armstead, he's an interior, he's an edge, he plays both. Kevin Givens is the backup. I mean, they just need help there in general.
The only thing I don't like about it is using the primary pick that you're getting for that guy on the same position. Like essentially using the pick that you're getting to replace that guy like for like, because so many times it doesn't work out. And when it doesn't, it looks terrible. I like the concept of we bring this guy in, we play him through the entirety of his contract, then we move him on for a pick that's as good, if not better, than the one we spent in the first place. But then if you're going to use that pick to try and replace the guy and just swing and miss on it, that feels like it stinks. Like, use that pick in a different way. Use it some other way than trying to shoehorn a guy that has to now come in and replace one of the best players in the league. Like when the Vikings trade away Randy Moss and use the pick to replace him on Troy Williamson. It's like, no, don't do that. Use the pick on literally anything else, not the replacement for Randy Moss.
That's what the Ravens did this year. They traded Marquise Brown and used their first. Then I think they traded down a couple more times, but the essential replacement was Tyler Linderbaum, right? They went center.
Right. So just use it on like best player available. Don't use it on the guy that has to come in and try and replace a legend.
Yeah, so if that pick was forced because of need, that is where it does become an issue. But if you draft a receiver, I don't care. Draft all the receivers you want.
Unless it's Troy Williamson.
Don't draft Troy Williamson. So interior defensive line for the Niners as their biggest need. And I still agree with their DeForest Buckner trade. Last team, NFC West here, Seattle Seahawks. Let me know if I missed anybody. And if you do, I can't see it because I'm in the air. Seattle Seahawks. We're going defensive line here as the biggest need for the Seahawks.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if they don't re-sign Geno Smith, it's quarterback, but we'll know about that once we get to free agency. I kind of assume they're going to keep him around. The only question really is what the contract looks like or what whether they franchise tag him or however it works. But I would assume they're going to keep Geno. I think they could still, as is always the case in Seattle, use some offensive line reinforcements. But, yeah, defensive line was basically Uchenna Nwosu, not much else. Like, okay, you got...
And he's their hybrid, edge, outside backer, old school outside backer type.
You got some flashes from Shelby Harris, who they got as part of the Russell Wilson trade. Poona Ford, I don't think, had a good season. I think they would have been expecting more from him.
Darrell Taylor was a good pass rusher, solid pass rusher. He had a couple strip sacks in there, but very inconsistent, especially against the run.
And Bruce Irvin comes back as like a part of the rotation. Like when you're sending up the bat signal for Bruce Irvin, things have not gone tremendously well on the defensive line.
Look, I'll say Seattle's situation this year versus last year, I feel like they accelerated their rebuild, and it wasn't really a rebuild. It was kind of like with the Eagles, right? It felt like it should have been a rebuild, and then they made the playoffs, much like the Eagles did a year ago at this time, which means Seattle's a Super Bowl team next year, Sam. Yeah. But the Eagles 2 years ago felt like they were rebuilding. I thought Seattle coming into this year felt like they were rebuilding, and then they hit on so many draft picks, shored up the offensive line at tackle for the most part, bring in Tariq Woolen, all that fun stuff. But they haven't brought in impact players on the defensive line in a while, which is why they're the team. As soon as they sign Geno Smith, every mock draft is like, Will Anderson or Jalen Carter? Will Anderson, are they taking edge, Will Anderson? Are they taking interior defensive lineman Jalen Carter from Georgia? Whichever one's available. One of those guys feels very much pegged for Seattle. The most interesting thing, I say fascinating and interesting a lot, but the thing I want to see here is predicting Seattle's drafts over the last 10 years, one of the most difficult things to do. And we haven't seen Seattle pick. We saw him pick number 9 last year with Charles Cross. I probably said the same thing last year. Predict what Seattle's going to do. Even in the top 10, what are they going to do at 4? Maybe it's not a Jalen Carter or Will Anderson, but it does feel like – 5. Defensive line is going to be the spot that they're going.
Right. I don't know if either of those guys will make it to 5. I guess it depends what the quarterback thing looks like in the first few picks. But it is kind of like does the team that brought you LJ Collier covet a Will Anderson? we wanted this as our answer to an edge rush situation a few years ago. Do you see the thing the same way? Do you buy into the idea that Will Anderson is as good as everyone else thinks he does? Or are you going to go for, something completely out of left field as your top 5 solution?
I mean, I think Anderson can do anything. Be his, hand in the dirt, stand up. But sometimes those are I don't think he can play with his hand in the dirt. I don't think he's not my 270-pound edge that I like. I don't know. I'm not saying Seattle specifically, but people do look at Cleveland Farrell went number 4 overall when he was our number 5 edge on the board, and I think that was
culture.
It was a culture pick.
Yeah.
It didn't work.
You have to get the locker room, in shape before you found players.
Right. It didn't work. Didn't work for that pick. So, yeah, Seattle's biggest need. We're going defensive line.